A serving New York police officer is pledged to defend the vulnerable. Yet on a frigid January morning with outdoor temperatures dropping to 19 degrees F, one officer was deliberately observing a child's excruciating deterioration. The boy was only 8 years old. He wasn't a victim of the streets. He was confined on the icy concrete floor of an unheated suburban garage, and the man observing him perish through the view of a security camera was his own father. To the outside world, Michael Valva was the image of order and public service. He entered the New York City Police Department in 2005, advancing his way to a transit officer navigating the hectic underground arteries of the city. Earning a comfortable 6-figure salary, he displayed the refined, irreparable facade of an authority figure. He was the man citizens turned to for safety. Beneath the uniform, his personal life was a crumbling structure. Michael had wed Justyna Zubko, a Polish immigrant who hoped of creating a stable family in America. Together they had 3 sons, Anthony, Thomas, and Andrew. The middle child, Thomas, was born in 2011 with a bright, contagious smile that concealed underlying developmental challenges. Both Thomas and his elder brother, Anthony, were later diagnosed with severe autism. They remained mostly nonverbal during their early years, coping with sensory overload and needing intensive structured therapies merely to manage a typical day. Raising children on the spectrum requires enormous patience, a quality Michael completely lacked. His method of parenting reflected a militaristic chain of command. Whenever the boys failed to meet his strict expectations, his irritation emerged through cold, authoritarian discipline. The burden of handling complex developmental needs weakened the foundation of the marriage. By 2015, Justyna and Michael were trapped in a vicious, deeply toxic divorce. What came afterward was a prolonged, agonizing custody battle that exposed a catastrophic flaw in the family court system. Michael knew how to exploit the legal machinery. He turned his badge into a weapon, portraying himself to judges and child welfare evaluators as a stoic, responsible law enforcement officer, saving his sons from an allegedly unstable mother. He submitted relentless petitions, overwhelming Justyna with legal paperwork and groundless accusations. He portrayed her as neglectful and erratic, employing his polished courtroom demeanor to gradually strip away her maternal rights. The system accepted his word over hers. In late 2017, a judge issued a ruling that sealed the boy's fate, awarding Michael full custody and drastically limiting Justyna's visitation to supervised fleeting moments. She was devastated, essentially removed from her children's daily lives, despite her desperate warnings to anyone who would listen that her ex-husband was a dangerous man. Armed with complete legal control, Michael moved his sons to a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Center Machias, a hamlet on the south shore of Long Island. The house at 11 Bittersweet Lane appeared like an idyllic suburban retreat. It featured a manicured lawn, an attached 12-car garage, and ample space for a growing family. It was exactly the kind of setting that deflects suspicion. For a short period, the narrative Michael presented to his neighbors remained intact. He was the devoted single father and decorated cop, sacrificing everything to raise 3 boys, 2 of whom had special needs. He was admired, he was respected, but the framework of this suburban dream was hollow. Michael had no intention of handling the heavy burden of autism with empathy or therapeutic intervention. He regarded his son's neurological differences not as a medical reality to be managed, but as intentional defiance that needed to be punished out of them. The Long Island home quickly transformed from a sanctuary into a heavily monitored detention center. Every room was equipped with an intricate network of security cameras. Michael insisted the surveillance was for the boys' safety, a necessary measure to supervise children prone to wandering. The reality was far more sinister. The cameras were positioned to enforce absolute obedience. If Anthony or Thomas displayed a sensory meltdown, failed to use the bathroom properly, or merely cried out, the lenses captured their infractions. The boys were completely isolated from their mother and left at the mercy of a man who equated discipline with pure terror. Yet, even with his authoritarian grip, Michael quickly realized he did not want to govern this dark kingdom alone. He was seeking a partner, someone who shared his chilling philosophy on control and punishment. The arrival of Angela Pina into the Valva residence in early 2018 served as a catalyst for a regime of systematic terror. Angela, a single mother of 3, brought her own children into the home, creating a crowded, volatile dynamic. She was not a moderating influence. She was the architect of the household's new draconian hierarchy. Together, she and Michael created a partnership defined by the absolute dehumanization of his 3 sons. The house on Bittersweet Lane stopped being a home. It became an institution of psychological warfare. Under Angela's influence, the boys' needs for therapy, speech assistance, and even normal interaction were considered disruptive. She viewed their neurodivergence not as a challenge, but as an affront to her order. The response was the execution of a training regimen that bypassed standard discipline, turning sharply into what investigators would later describe as localized torture. The boys were deprived of their autonomy. They were compelled to eat their meals in the garage, a cold, isolated space that smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. They were placed on restricted starvation-level diets under the guise of weight management, despite their obvious physical deterioration. If they failed to obey the house rules, rules that shifted with the volatility of Angela's moods, the consequences were immediate and severe. For the slightest transgressions, they were denied access to the main living area. They were compelled to sleep on the hard, unheated floor of the garage, regardless of the season or the plunging Long Island temperatures. The boys began to shed weight rapidly. Their faces became gaunt, their skin sallow. They were often observed by neighbors and teachers wearing stained, ill-fitting clothes. Their personal hygiene plainly neglected, despite Michael's constant claims that he was providing exemplary care. Teachers at East Morish's elementary school noticed the decline of the boys' well-being almost immediately. Thomas, once a lively child, began arriving at school lethargic, cold to the touch, and frequently bruised. His performance deteriorated. He struggled to remain awake during lessons. The school staff, distressed by the drastic changes, initiated a wave of reports to Child Protective Services. The institutional response was a profound systemic failure. Between 2018 and 2020, CPS received at least a dozen reports concerning the Valva home. Teachers documented that the boys were arriving at school starving, pleading for food, and trembling in the classrooms. They reported visible welts, suspicious abrasions, and a persistent, lingering odor of urine. Every report triggered an investigation, but every investigation was met with Michael's polished, authoritative denial. He manipulated the system with the precision of a seasoned detective. When CPS agents arrived, he would present a carefully curated image of a stressed but loving father doing his best with children who were difficult to manage due to their autism. He used his NYPD background to intimidate investigators, implying that he knew the rules of the game better than they did. Angela stood beside his side, reinforcing the narrative that the children were simply prone to behavioral outbursts and physical self-harm. The system was immobilized by his badge. CPS agents documented their concerns, but their supervisors repeatedly closed the cases as unfounded, seemingly intimidated by the idea of accusing a fellow law enforcement officer of child abuse. The boys were trapped. Every time a teacher reached out, Michael punished the children for the attention they had brought upon the family. The monitoring became stricter. The beatings became more frequent. The couple started to communicate their frustrations through a series of cold, detached text messages that would later serve as the primary evidence of their shared malice. They discussed the boys with a detached clinical cruelty, referring to them as nuisances or burdens. Angela would send messages complaining that Thomas had wet himself or that Anthony had failed to follow a command, and Michael would reply with promises of harsher discipline. They were not two parents struggling with the realities of raising special needs children. They were two people bonding over the systematic breaking of their spirits. By the winter of 2020, the garage had become a permanent freezing prison. It was no longer a temporary space for a timeout. It was where Thomas and Anthony spent their nights, shivering on the bare floor, separated from the warmth of the home by a single wall. The boys had no blankets, no pillows, and no access to a toilet. They were forced to exist in a state of constant low-grade hypothermia. Michael and Angela observed them through the Nest camera, occasionally delivering instructions through the speaker if the boys moved or made a sound. The stage was set for a tragedy that the entire community would later realize was entirely preventable. Had anyone bothered to look beyond the badge and see the suffering that was happening in plain sight. The night of January 16th flowed into the early hours of the 17th with a biting, merciless edge. Outside the property on Bittersweet Lane, the temperature dropped to 19 degrees F. Inside the unheated attached garage, it was scarcely any warmer. The concrete floor functioned as a massive heat sink, drawing whatever residual warmth remained in the stagnant air. There was no insulation, no drywall, only the raw, abrasive surface of the cement and a few scattered dog training pads, the only bedding provided for two severely malnourished boys. Hypothermia does not reveal itself with a sudden crash. It is a slow, methodical thief. It steals heat from the extremities first, forcing the heart to beat sluggishly, conserving blood in the core to protect the vital organs. The boys had been exposed to these sub-freezing conditions for months, their bodies already weakened from extreme caloric restriction. But this particular morning was different. The cold was absolute. It overwhelmed their meager, exhausted defense mechanisms entirely. Sometime before dawn, Thomas lost control of his bodily functions. It was an inevitable biological response to severe, prolonged freezing and extreme stress compounded by his neurological condition. He soiled his sweatpants. In a normal household, this would trigger a warm bath and clean clothes. In this environment, it was an unforgivable infraction. The home's security system silently recorded the movement. The internal microphones flickered to life, capturing the rustling in the dark, followed by the heavy, deliberate footsteps of a man who had just been inconvenienced. Michael entered the garage. The audio recordings later recovered from the hard drive would capture the sheer, unfiltered malice of his approach. He did not evaluate the situation with a shred of paternal concern. He demanded absolute compliance from a child whose brain was actively shutting down from the cold. Michael noticed the soiled clothing. The punishment was determined instantly, and it was going to be delivered with freezing water. He dragged the boy outside into the frozen backyard. The sun had not fully risen. The frost on the grass crackled underfoot. Michael bypassed the indoor bathrooms, heading straight for the exterior spigot connected to a garden hose. The water resting in those pipes was near freezing. He turned the valve. He ordered his son to remove everything, then sprayed the ice-cold water directly onto his bare, emaciated chest. The shock of freezing water on a hypothermic body accelerates the dying process exponentially. The cold liquid strips away the skin's last remaining thermal barrier, plunging the core temperature into a lethal freefall. The boy's muscles tightened, his nervous system misfired. He could no longer shiver to generate friction and heat. The body was rapidly prioritizing the brain and the heart, completely shutting off blood flow to the limbs. He could barely stand. Michael dragged him back into the garage. The interior Nest camera recorded the aftermath. The footage showed a child who looked more like a hollow shell than a human being. He was completely naked, dripping wet and shaking with a violent, terrifying lack of coordination. He attempted to rise on the concrete, but his legs simply gave way. He pitched forward, face planting onto the hard cement. The sickening sound of bone striking stone echoed sharply through the microphone. There was no gasp of horror from the adults, no frantic rush to check for a concussion. Michael simply stood above him. The audio captured the father coldly assessing the fall, remarking over the intercom system that the boy was putting on an act. He noted the way his son hit the ground, expressing a twisted satisfaction that the child had finally fallen on his face. Angela, monitoring from the warmth of another room, affirmed the cruelty. She communicated through the speaker, noting that the child was looking at them and insisted he be made to clean himself up. They spoke about the boy with the detached annoyance of prison guards dealing with a recalcitrant inmate. They left him there on the floor. The boy tried to push himself up, his arms trembling violently, but he lacked the basic motor function to lock his elbows. He collapsed again. The temperature in the garage remained unchanged. His core temperature was dropping past the point of no return, crossing rapidly from mild to moderate to severe hypothermia. At this stage of freezing, the biology of death takes over. The organs begin to fail sequentially. The kidneys stop filtering. The heart struggled to maintain a regular rhythm, the blood thickening into a cold sludge. Time crawled. The camera continued its silent, indifferent observation. It captured the exact horrific moment the shivering stopped. When a freezing body stops shivering, it is not a sign of warming or comfort. It is the central nervous system raising a white flag. The muscles loosen. The breathing becomes shallow, barely moving the chest wall. The brain runs out of oxygenated blood. Minutes passed by in heavy silence. The stillness in the garage finally caught Michael's attention. The boy wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. The father walked back in, his boots scraping the concrete. He nudged the limp form. Nothing. He issued a sharp command. Silence. The frustration in his movements suddenly gave way to a sharp, entirely selfish panic. It was not the terror of a parent realizing they were losing their child. It was the massive adrenaline spike of a police officer, realizing he had a dead body on his property. He lifted the freezing, unresponsive form and finally brought him into the heated portion of the house. He dragged him down to the basement playroom. Michael shouted to Angela that the boy was out cold. The atmosphere in the house shifted violently from punishment to extreme liability. Instead of calling emergency services immediately, Precious time was needlessly squandered. The security network captured the frantic, hushed discussions between the couple about what to do next. They needed to clean him. They needed to warm him up just enough to make a narrative plausible. They needed a solid, impenetrable story, a slip and fall, a tragic, unavoidable accident. While waiting for the school bus, while an 8-year-old boy lay dying on the basement floor, his father began constructing an alibi. The window of survivability closed, while the adults in the house prioritized their alibi. Medical experts would later note that when the boy was first carried up from the freezing garage, his heart was likely still beating faintly, erratically, but beating. A warm bath, thermal blankets, and an immediate emergency response might have reversed the descent into terminal hypothermia. Instead, nearly an hour slipped away. During those critical minutes, the homeowner focused on cleaning the crime scene and coordinating a cover story. Only after the narrative was established and the child's pulse had completely faded did he pick up the phone. At exactly 9:40 a.m., the Suffolk County Emergency Dispatch System logged the incoming call. The voice on the line belonged to a man intimately familiar with how 911 operates from the other side of the radio. He injected a carefully measured dose of panic into his tone, telling the operator that his son had taken a hard spill on the driveway while running for the school bus. He claimed the boy had struck his head, lost consciousness, and was no longer breathing. Following standard protocol, the dispatcher instructed the caller to place the phone on speaker and begin chest compressions. The audio recording captured the rhythmic heavy thuds of the father supposedly performing CPR, a performative hollow effort executed on a body that had already been irreparably destroyed by the cold. When local paramedics and patrol officers crossed the threshold of the Bittersweet Lane residence, they stepped into a heavily heated, immaculate home. The contrast between the ambient temperature of the living room and the physical state of the patient was immediately striking. First response found the father in the basement playroom, kneeling beside his son. He was going through the motions of resuscitation, but his demeanor lacked the chaotic, blind desperation typical of a parent losing a child. He was entirely too composed, casually informing the arriving officers that he was in on YPD, subtly trying to establish professional courtesy and control the flow of information right from the start. The lead paramedic dropped beside the boy and placed a hand on his bare chest to position the defibrillator pads. The EMT physically recoiled. The child's skin was not just cool to the touch, it was a dense, unnatural block of ice. The limbs were stiff, locking into place with a rigidity that usually takes hours of post-mortem lividity to achieve. There was no obvious laceration, no skull depression, and no localized pooling of blood to support a catastrophic fall on a concrete driveway. Nothing about the physical trauma matched the father's story. The paramedic initiated rapid transport protocol. They loaded the lifeless form onto a stretcher and rushed him to the waiting ambulance. The ride to Long Island Community Hospital was a frantic, chaotic exercise in futility. The EMTs attempted to administer life-saving medications, but the veins were completely collapsed. They tried to establish a secure airway, but the jaw muscles were locked tight from the extreme physiological shock. The interior of the ambulance was cranked to maximum heat, yet the boy's flesh simply absorbed the warmth without showing any vital signs. Through it all, the medical team exchanged troubled glances. They knew the physiological signs of freezing. They knew they were not treating a head injury. Inside the hospital's trauma bay, a specialized pediatric resuscitation team took over. They immediately initiated severe hypothermia protocols. Medical doctrine dictates that a freezing victim is not clinically dead until they are warm and dead. The doctors ordered bear hugger warming blankets, heated intravenous saline, and continuous automated chest compressions. The room hummed with the mechanical whine of ventilators and the flat, sustained tone of the heart monitor. Amidst the chaos of the trauma bay, the attending physician needed to establish a baseline. A standard digital thermometer registered nothing. The patient's temperature was too low to read. The staff inserted a specialized esophageal thermometer deep into the chest cavity to measure the exact core temperature around the heart and lungs. When the digital display finally appeared, the trauma team fell completely silent. The monitor read 76.1 degrees F. Normal human core temperature is 98.6. At 90 degrees, severe confusion and amnesia set in. At 82 degrees, the heart loses its ability to pump effectively, and the victim loses consciousness. At 76.1 degrees, the cellular structure simply ceases to function. It was a temperature that was biologically impossible to reach from a brief slip on a suburban driveway. It was a number that indicated prolonged, agonizing exposure to a sub-freezing environment. The medical staff continued their warming efforts for nearly an hour, adhering strictly to protocol, but the damage to the myocardium was absolute. There was no electrical activity left to restore. The formal pronouncement of death was recorded later that morning. Out in the hospital waiting room, the father continued his performance. He paced the floor, shed hollow tears for the benefit of the hospital staff, and repeatedly relied on his law enforcement credentials when questioned by the attending nurses. He expected his badge to protect him from scrutiny. He assumed the medical examiner would glance at the lack of massive blunt force trauma, write it off as an unexplained, sudden cardiac event, and close the file. But the trauma doctors had already noticed the gaunt, emaciated frame, the unusual abrasions, and that impossible damning core temperature. Before the father even left the hospital grounds, the attending physician picked up a secure phone and initiated a direct line to Suffolk County homicide detectives. The medical intervention had failed, but the investigation was only beginning, and the driveway narrative was already falling apart. The transition from a medical emergency to a homicide investigation occurred before the victim's body was even transferred to the county morgue. Suffolk County detectives were dispatched to the hospital and the Bittersweet Lane residence simultaneously. They held the core temperature reading from the trauma bay, a stark numerical fact that completely dismantled the suspect's story of a sudden morning tumble. A human body simply does not lose 22 degrees of vital core heat during a brief frantic sprint to a school bus. When investigators arrived at the property, they were met by a man who fully expected professional deference. He stood in his living room projecting the exhausted stoicism of a grieving parent, while subtly mentioning his NYPD rank during the conversation. He anticipated the unspoken fraternity of law enforcement to protect him from aggressive interrogation. The initial walkthrough of the home presented a frustrating, meticulously sanitized facade. The main living areas were immaculate, smelling faintly of citrus cleaner. Outside, the driveway where the fatal injury supposedly occurred was completely clear. Crime scene technicians noted a complete absence of blood, ice patches, or any physical irregularity that could support a catastrophic blunt force trauma. The detectives faced an immediate, infuriating obstacle. Without a confession or an independent witness, they possessed a deceased child with a bizarre thermal presentation, but a highly experienced suspect who knew exactly how the interrogation game was played. When detectives pressed for specific minute-by-minute timelines regarding the morning routine, the father recognized the shifting accusatory tone. Relying on his academy training, he abruptly ended the conversation and invoked his right to counsel. The house fell silent. The investigators were forced to step back, secure the perimeter, and wait for a judge to sign search warrants. The breakthrough did not originate from human testimony. It came from the ceiling corners. During their initial visual sweep, technicians noted an extensive, highly sophisticated network of Wise and Nest surveillance cameras mounted both inside and outside the property. The homeowner had claimed the interior lenses were inactive, simply dead remnants of a past security setup. Homicide detectives, however, operate on the premise that digital hardware never truly forgets. They drafted comprehensive warrants targeting not just the physical local routers in the house, but the external cloud servers hosted by the tech companies. While waiting for the cyber extraction, forensics teams dismantled the physical crime scene. They focused their attention intensely on the attached garage. The space stood in stark, chilling contrast to the pristine house. It was heavily drafted, and underneath a thick, fresh layer of industrial bleach retained the distinct acrid odor of dried urine. Investigators cataloged soiled dog training pads pushed into a dark corner. There were no beds, no thermal blankets, only rough concrete, and a few discarded undersized items of children's clothing. Technicians took ambient temperature readings of the floor, documenting the brutal thermal reality of the space. The hidden architecture of the boy's existence was finally emerging. 72 hours later, the Cyber Crimes Unit successfully retrieved a massive cache of data from the external cloud servers. The suspect had actively attempted to erase the files from his phone on the morning of the incident, confident that wiping his application history would erase his sins. He had greatly underestimated the automatic backup redundancy of modern security systems. What the detectives witnessed in the viewing room of the precinct was a concentrated, unfiltered display of human depravity. Seasoned investigators, personnel who had spent decades examining violent gang murders and fatal accidents, sat in heavy silence as the mid-January footage played across their monitors. The restored digital files provided an unflinching timeline. They watched the 8-year-old shivering uncontrollably on the concrete. They processed the audio tracks, hearing the sharp blast of the exterior water spigot and the subsequent sickening sound of the boy collapsing face first onto the cement. The audio was pristine. It captured the father's cruel mockery of his son's physical inability to stand, followed by the stepmother's voice transmitting over the intercom system. She affirmed the abuse, expressing sheer annoyance at the child's lack of coordination rather than any alarm for his safety. The digital media explicitly contradicted every single statement given to the emergency dispatcher and the arriving paramedics. There was no chaotic fall in the driveway. There was no tragic accident. There was only a calculated, prolonged execution by exposure. Armed with the video evidence, technicians expanded their digital search, applying Cellbrite extraction software to the cellular devices seized from the residents. The text message history between the couple spanned years and served as the psychological blueprint of the household. The data dump yielded tens of thousands of messages. They did not read like the communications of overwhelmed parents navigating the complexities of autism. They read like the cold logistics of a penal colony. The SMS threads detailed a highly coordinated strategy of thermal deprivation and starvation. The stepmother frequently complained about the boy's mere presence in the main house, demanding they be exiled to the garage. The father readily complied, assuring her through text that the children would be beaten until they learned absolute obedience. They discussed restricting access to the kitchen, locking the pantry doors, and utilizing the freezing dark as a standard disciplinary measure. The digital trail proved conclusively that the fatal morning was not an isolated lapse in judgment. It was the terminal end of a systematic torture regimen that both adults actively maintained. The facade of the respectable suburban police officer was completely destroyed. The local department, initially hesitant about investigating one of their own, acted with overwhelming force. The evidence was undeniable. Exactly 1 week after the child was pronounced dead in the trauma bay, unmarked police vehicles surrounded the Bittersweet Lane home. Detectives moved in with tactical precision, securing the premises and placing both the father and the stepmother in handcuffs. They were transported to the precinct, stripped of their belts and shoelaces, and booked on charges of second-degree murder and child endangerment. The arrest sent a violent shockwave through the Center Meridic community. Neighbors who had previously praised the father's supposed dedication were left confronting a profound, sickening sense of horror. The realization that a child had slowly frozen to death behind the closed doors of a seemingly perfect middle-class home shattered the neighborhood's illusion of safety. The thin blue line narrative collapsed entirely as the public demanded answers, furious at the institutional blindness that had ignored years of frantic warnings from local educators. The investigation had successfully pulled back the curtain on a domestic nightmare. But the hardest phase of the process was just approaching on the horizon. The wheels of justice grind slowly, and it took nearly 3 years for the legal reckoning to fully materialize in Suffolk County. By the fall of 2022, the former transit cop found himself sitting at the defense table, entirely stripped of his uniform, his pension, and his authority. The united defensive front he had maintained with his fiancée had completely collapsed under the weight of impending prison time. What unfolded was a vicious, calculated game of self-preservation. His defense attorneys deployed a desperate strategy. They sought to portray their client as an exhausted, passive figure, a man completely controlled by a manipulative partner who orchestrated the draconian punishments. They claimed that the fatal morning was a tragic culmination of poor parenting and sheer panic, not depraved indifference to human life. They maintained he never intended to kill. The prosecution did not waste time debating semantics. They darkened the courtroom lights and let the digital evidence speak. When the state presented the recovered security footage, the atmosphere in the room became suffocatingly heavy. Jurors were compelled to hear the final agonizing minutes of a child freezing to death on a concrete floor. They heard the horrifying thud of the fall. They heard the heartless, taunting commentary from the adults. Several jurors cried openly. Others simply gazed at the defendant with undisguised revulsion. The biological mother, who had been systematically estranged and ignored for years, sat in the gallery. she was forced to endure the graphic clinical details of her son's demise. From the initial EMT reports describing his icy skin to the medical examiner's detailed explanation of terminal hypothermia, the teachers who had filed dozens of ignored reports took the stand, their voices heavy with the grief of knowing their warnings had gone unheard. The evidence created an unbreakable barrier. In early November 2022, the jury delivered a swift, unanimous verdict. They found him guilty of murder in the second degree and multiple counts of endangering the welfare of a child. Weeks afterward, the presiding judge imposed the absolute maximum sentence permitted, 25 years to life behind bars. The stepmother's turn arrived in early 2023. Her legal team advanced the exact opposite of her former partner's narrative. They sought to portray her as a frightened, abused woman trapped by an aggressive, highly trained police officer. They argued she was a helpless bystander in her own home, too fearful of his explosive temper to step in and rescue the boys. Her own digital footprint destroyed that defense. Prosecutors displayed her text messages across the courtroom screens. The jury read the cold, calculated demands she made to exile the children from the heated living spaces. They heard her detached voice coming through the garage intercom, scolding a child whose core temperature was in freefall. She was not a victim of circumstance. The state proved she was the designer of the environment that made the murder possible. Her jury deliberated for barely 2 hours. The verdict matched her fiancé's exactly. Soon afterward, she appeared before the same judge and received the identical sentence of 25 years to life in a maximum security penitentiary. The gavels fell, locking the offenders away for the remainder of their natural lives. However, the conclusion of the criminal dockets did not bring genuine closure. It merely redirected the spotlight toward the massive institutional failures that had permitted a documented domestic prison to function in plain sight. The tragedy in Center Medius permanently shattered the quiet facade of Long Island suburbia. It proved that predators do not always hide in the dark. Sometimes they wear a patrol badge and wave from a manicured lawn. A child froze on a concrete floor because an entire protective system was too intimidated to look beyond a uniform. Dozens of desperate alarms sounded for years only to be silenced by bureaucratic apathy. Justice was eventually delivered, but it arrived far too late to offer any real warmth. Michael Mike Redlick was born on May 1, 1953 in Cleveland, Ohio. He was the sort of man who made spaces feel more united, a gifted connector, somebody who recognized that in the sports business, everything depended on trust and relationships. He developed the qualifications to match that talent. He obtained a bachelor's degree in communications from Ohio University, followed by a master's in sports administration from the same school, and then a law degree on top of that. He was not merely a fan who became fortunate. He was prepared for the boardroom. His profession reflected it. Across the following decades, Michael served as a senior executive with some of the largest names in American professional sports: the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Browns, the Memphis Grizzlies, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. His responsibilities focused on corporate sponsorships, marketing, and revenue. Wherever he worked, he produced money for the organizations that employed him. In 2013, Ohio University named him the Charles R. Higgins Distinguished Alumnus, an honor awarded to graduates who not only thrive in the industry, but give back into it. That same year, Michael moved into a new chapter. He joined the DeVos Sport Business Management graduate program at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, becoming Director of External Affairs and Partnership Relations. His students referred to him Red. He assisted them network, arranged speaker series, and placed calls on their behalf. He was, by numerous accounts, sincerely committed to their futures. One of the subjects he discussed about openly was why he had accepted a substantial salary cut to leave the professional sports world for an academic program. He wanted stability. He wanted to quit moving his family from city to city. He wanted a life in one place for his children's sake. When he died, UCF's leadership received more than 200 messages of condolence from alumni and industry colleagues. More than 125 former students attended his celebration of life. More than 100 traveled from outside of state to be there. By every public measure, Michael Redlick was a man to be respected. But there was another side of Michael, the one that existed within his marriage. And to understand that marriage, you have to understand how it started. In the late 1990s, Michael was in a relationship with a woman named Kathy, also identified in certain court filings as Kathleen Aquino. According to reporting based on police interviews, Kathy developed breast cancer, and Michael married her so she could obtain health insurance through his plan. It was an act that, depending on how you viewed it, was either quietly generous or part of a more complicated arrangement. Kathy had a daughter. Her name was Danielle. Danielle was in her early 20s when Michael entered her life through her mother. She was residing in Cleveland, working as a bartender at night. Michael, established and older, started visiting her during her evening shifts. She later testified that she liked his company. She described him as sophisticated, intelligent, thrilling in a way that felt fresh. Kathy died in 1999. In the years that followed, Danielle and Michael became closer. The relationship that formed between a man who had briefly occupied a stepfather role in her life and the young woman he had known through her mother was, by any standard, unconventional. The age gap was roughly 20 years, but the relationship became something genuine. And then it became a marriage. Michael's career took him to Memphis, and he began flying Danielle down on weekends. He eventually astonished her with a house, a property with a pool on a riverfront. He said he had purchased it for them. By her own account, she was carried away in it. They married. They had 2 children together, a daughter named Jaden and a son named Sawyer. Michael's career kept the family relocating. Ohio, Memphis, California, Indiana, Florida. Each relocation was prompted by professional opportunity. Each one unsettled the family further. Danielle later testified that the relationship was good early on, but began to worsen significantly after the move to California. The family eventually settled in Winter Park, Florida, an affluent suburb of Orlando, when Michael joined UCF. From the outside, the Redlick home appeared like stability finally achieved. It was not. At trial, 2 distinctly different portraits of Michael emerged. To his students and colleagues, he was the mentor who encouraged you to aim higher. To Danielle's defense, he was a man who became controlling and physically abusive, particularly when drinking. She testified that he struck her more than once, that when he was drunk or angry about work, she suffered for it. She described one incident in which he punched her in the face. A defense witness, Dr. Frederick Azar, a physician who had worked with the Memphis Grizzlies, testified that he examined both Danielle and Michael for injuries following a domestic incident. No medical records were introduced to support that claim. Michael's close friend, Pete Diebel, challenged the portrait the defense presented entirely, and Jaden, the couple's daughter, testified at trial that she considered her relationship with her mother toxic, and that Danielle was frequently the one starting the arguments. The truth of what occurred inside that home when nobody else was present was exactly what the trial would spend years attempting to determine. In 2016, the marriage reached a breaking point. According to trial testimony summarized by Court TV, Michael had an affair. Danielle filed for divorce. The divorce was never completed. They remained together, or rather, they remained legally bound to each other, which is not the same thing. The resentment that had been building since California hardened into something permanent. Danielle was no longer simply unhappy. She was, by her own account, and by the account of people who knew the family, searching for a way out of a life she no longer wanted. By late 2018, Danielle had joined a dating app called Meet Mindful, listing herself as separated. The last message she sent was January 1st, 2019. The last message she received was January 8th. Meanwhile, Michael had relocated out of the family home in April 2018. During the separation, he occasionally brought flowers. He sent text messages asking to return, saying he wasn't done living under that roof. By October 2018, he moved back in. Jaden noticed the tension immediately. She said she knew her parents weren't getting along, though she also said her father seemed sincerely excited about returning. Things did not improve for long. By the first week of January 2019, whatever fragile peace had settled over the household was coming apart. On January 10th, the day before Michael died, he found a message on Danielle's phone from another man. He was furious. Their daughter Jaden later testified that Danielle warned her something might be wrong because of what Michael had uncovered. When he came home that evening, Jaden described him as withdrawn, not very talkative, and drinking. The argument between her parents burst open in front of her. She stepped between them, seized the bottle Michael was drinking from, and tossed it into the dumpster outside. Then she went to stay at a friend's house. The next morning, January 11th, Michael called Jaden. He apologized. He said he loved her. He told her he wished she hadn't witnessed what she saw. Those were the final words Jaden would hear from her father. Michael went to work at UCF as usual that day. At approximately 4:42 in the afternoon, he stopped at an ABC liquor store and purchased alcohol. Then he went to Sawyer's flag football game, a game he was helping to coach. Pete Diebel, who was also at the game, later testified that Danielle seemed off that afternoon and that Michael seemed preoccupied once the game ended. After the game, Sawyer left for a sleepover at a friend's house. Jaden was already away. The couple drove home together. They were alone. What happened next inside the home on North Summerlin Avenue depends entirely on whose account you believe. Danielle testified that the argument from the previous day had never truly ended. After they returned home from the football game, she said it intensified. Michael grabbed her by the hair. He shoved her against the kitchen island. He held her down. He covered her face until she could not breathe. She said she believed she was going to die. She reached into a kitchen drawer, grabbed a knife, and stabbed him once. Prosecutors told a different story, or rather, they told the story of what came afterward, and argued those actions revealed the truth of what came before. Because after whatever happened in that kitchen, Danielle did not call 911. She did not call a neighbor or a friend or anyone. According to trial testimony, she said she could not locate her phone. She said she attempted CPR. She said she did not know what to do. And then, and this is the detail prosecutors returned to again and again, she scrubbed, she washed, she cleaned. She washed the floors around Michael's body. She cleaned surfaces, the 5-gallon bucket, the soaked towels, the cleaning fluid. That was the scene officers found the following morning. Bloodstain pattern analysis added a troubling detail. Michael's socks were saturated with blood, suggesting he had remained upright at some point after the stabbing. The analysts believed he had walked, or been moved, from the bedroom through the bathroom to the living room, where he finally died. His fatal wound had severed a major vein, passed between ribs, and punctured the top of his lung. He may not have died instantly. 4 knives were recovered. 1 had Danielle's DNA. 3 had Michael's DNA. Prosecutors also argued that Danielle accessed her meat-mindful profile sometime during those 11 hours. The dating site's owner testified that no messages were sent or received on January 11th, but the prosecution maintained she had checked the account while Michael lay dead. According to Court TV's trial summary, at some point Danielle went to sleep. She woke the next morning, cut her wrists, and when she began bleeding, she called 911. She told the dispatcher it might have been a heart attack. Officers arrived to find Michael dead. Danielle had lacerations on her wrists and hands. In the hours that followed, her story shifted from heart attack to self-inflicted wound. She told investigators Michael had stabbed himself during their argument. The medical examiner would later testify clearly, Michael Redlick did not die of a heart attack. He did not stab himself. The manner of death was homicide. His body showed additional injuries consistent with a physical struggle. Bruising to his face, upper inner lip, left arm, and side. On February 6, 2019, Danielle was charged with second-degree murder with a weapon and tampering with physical evidence. She declined a plea offer. The trial did not begin until June 2022, more than 3 years after Michael's death. By then, Danielle had spent more than 1,000 days in custody. The delay was caused by a combination of pre-trial proceedings, a rejected plea offer, and the disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic. Michael had been dead for 3 years before a jury ever heard the case. Both sides agreed she stabbed him. The entire trial was a dispute over what that meant. The prosecution focused on the 11 hours, the delay, the cleaned scene, the false 911 account, and the jailhouse calls made using another inmate's PIN number, in which Danielle discussed her regrets and her children, but never once told her sister she had acted in self-defense. They presented a May 2018 email found in Michael's UCF office, in which Danielle had written that she had bled to death, with the phrase underlined, and argued it showed how deeply she despised the marriage long before the stabbing. The defense put Danielle on the stand. She was composed. She admitted the stabbing. She did not come to court to deny it. She described being choked and smothered, unable to breathe, her face forced down until she could not get air. She said she thought he had snapped. She said she reached for the knife out of desperation, not calculation, and that she stabbed him once to break free. Her attorneys portrayed the relationship from its very beginning, the age gap, the power imbalance, Michael's alleged years of physical abuse and infidelity, the controlling behavior that intensified whenever he felt Danielle pulling away. They presented a defense witness, Dr. Frederick Azar, a physician who had worked with the Memphis Grizzlies, who testified that he had treated both Danielle and Michael for injuries after a domestic incident. In closing, defense attorney Andrew Parnell described their relationship as one that had shifted from parent to partner, never built on equal footing, never between two people who started on level ground. On June 17, 2022, the jury returned its verdict. Not guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of tampering with evidence, Danielle cried. Her attorney explained what the verdict meant. She left the courthouse, found her father waiting, and told a reporter 2 words, "God is good." In August 2022, she was sentenced to 364 days in jail with credit for time already served, plus 12 months of probation and a mandatory mental health evaluation. Before sentencing, a statement from the couple's daughter was read into the record through her guardian ad litem. Jaden said she was fearful of her mother. She asked the judge to keep Danielle away from her and her brother Sawyer. Danielle appeared to weep as the statement was read. Legal and technical analysis. The Redlich verdict is a clear illustration of how the burden of proof is supposed to work, and why the outcome can feel deeply unsatisfying. Florida's second-degree murder statute requires the state to prove the killing was done with a depraved mind eminently dangerous to another. But once a defendant raises self-defense, the burden shifts. The prosecution must disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They don't need to prove the defendant is lying. They need to prove the jury can be certain the self-defense claim was false. The 11 hours, the cleaning, the shifting stories, those were all post-stabbing actions. None of them directly disproved that the stabbing itself happened in the way Danielle described. The medical evidence confirmed a violent physical confrontation. The bruising on Michael's body didn't tell the jury who attacked first. It only told them there was a fight. The tampering conviction was clearer. Danielle admitted mopping around Michael's body. The scene was demonstrably altered before police arrived. The jury appears to have concluded that whatever happened in that kitchen was too uncertain to convict for murder. But what happened in the following 11 hours was not uncertain at all. One juror said that the state had left too much room for reasonable doubt, especially given the alleged history of domestic abuse. This is why domestic homicide cases involving mutual allegations of violence are among the hardest to prosecute. The only witness to what happened in that kitchen was the person on trial. Psychological analysis. To understand the psychology of this case, you have to begin where the relationship began. Danielle met Michael through her terminally ill mother. She was in her early 20s, working nights without a stable support structure. Her mother died. Michael was there. He was older, financially secure, and able to provide a kind of stability she hadn't had. He flew her places. He bought her a house. And then he became her husband. Psychologists who study relationships shaped by substantial power imbalances, particularly those involving age gaps, caretaking origins, and financial dependence, consistently note that these dynamics carry an increased risk of control. One partner holds more resources, more experience, more authority. The other builds their identity around the life that partner provides. Whether Michael exercised control in the way Danielle described at trial cannot be confirmed from public record alone, but the structural conditions for that dynamic were present from the beginning. What makes the psychology of the 11 hours so difficult to interpret is that trauma and guilt can produce nearly identical outward behaviors. A person in dissociative shock after surviving a life-threatening attack might clean compulsively, lie down, fail to call for help, and be unable to construct a coherent account of events. A person trying to conceal evidence of an unjustified killing might do the exact same things. The behavior pattern doesn't resolve the question, it deepens it. What we can say with confidence is this: by the time Michael died, this was not a healthy marriage. It was two people trapped in a relationship shaped by grief, financial dependence, alleged infidelity, alleged physical violence, separation and reunion, with 2 children witnessing all of it. That is what the Redlich case ultimately leaves behind. Not a clear verdict, not a resolved family. 2 children who grew up watching their parents destroy each other, lost their father in the most violent way imaginable, and then, even after the jury said it couldn't prove murder, found that the relationship with their mother had become something they feared, rather than something they sought comfort in. No verdict addresses that. The Danielle and Michael Redlich case doesn't end neatly. A jury decided the state hadn't proven murder. A judge sentenced Danielle for what could be proven, tampering with the scene. Michael's closest friend said publicly that he believed justice had not been served, and Jaden Redlich, who lost both parents in different ways on the same night, told the court she was afraid to be near the one who survived. True crime cases don't always give us the clarity we want. Sometimes, They give us something harder, a story where two people were trapped inside something they couldn't escape, and where the only way it ended was the worst way possible. Everyone has encountered the painful stories of unfaithful partners who somehow ruin their families throughout the years. Today's case will certainly be remembered in history. The unbelievable aspect of this story is that it shattered our prior beliefs about deceivers and killers, while requiring a remarkable 13 years to finally uncover. Central to this strange account is David Cam, a man once believed to have murdered his entire family. Yet did another person arrange the crime, or was he truly the killer? And who might have carried out such a terrible act if he wasn't responsible? I assure you this remains among the strangest and most shocking mysteries you will ever discover. And as usual, we will examine this case thoroughly. Kimberly and David Cam appear here. They first met during the mid-1980s and were raised in New Albany, Indiana. In 1989, Kim became David's second wife after they connected and developed a strong bond that brought the pair closer together from that point onward too. Everything seemed to be progressing in the right direction. That same year, David applied to join the Indiana State Police and was accepted, later becoming an officer in the Emergency Response Unit. Several years afterward, in 1993, the couple welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley. It was David's second child because he already had a daughter from his previous marriage, while it was Kim's first. When David started a relationship with Stephanie McCarty, a younger woman he had met at the gym, during the summer of 1994, the growing Cam family appeared to be doing well. Kim was pregnant with their second child, making the timing of David's betrayal even more devastating. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. After David abandoned their home and moved in with his mistress, Kim was forced to depend on her family for support. Despite the circumstances, both her family and David stood by her and offered the help she needed throughout such a difficult time. On February 28, 1995, Kim delivered their daughter Jillian, and the whole family gathered to support her, meaning everyone except David. Nevertheless, the affair was over by March of that year, and David attempted to repair the damage he had caused. Fueled by her devotion to her family and duties as a mother, Kim considered offering him another chance, even after the pain. Surprisingly, David came back, and both families backed Kim's choice to forgive him. Shortly afterward, the couple began building a new home on Lockhart Road in Georgetown, Indiana, representing a fresh start for them. Due to the personal ties involved, they chose to make this location their residence. Actually, the road received its name from relatives on David's mother's side, adding greater history and significance to their home. For a while, circumstances seemed to improve, and they looked as though they were moving along the proper path. Yet, as the saying claims, once a cheater, always a cheater. Although known as a flirt, David went beyond simple flirting. He sought out women with whom he could pursue brief affairs, often meeting them inside his patrol vehicle. Furthermore, David and two other state troopers faced a lawsuit for allegedly striking a 19-year-old during an arrest. Alongside his poor record, he received numerous additional complaints. After he was demoted again, his pride was damaged, further intensifying his narcissistic behaviors and causing more problems within his professional life. David, tired of enduring the disrespect, decided to take a chance. Following his resignation, he took a sales job at his uncle's basement waterproofing business. The advantages were clear almost immediately. His new position offered improved hours, allowing him to devote more time to Kim and the children, something he had been unable to do while serving as a state trooper. He was no longer simply a stranger inside his own home. He was there, involved, and taking part in family life. Their way of living became somewhat more comfortable, because he was bringing in significantly more income than he ever earned as a police officer. By the year 2000, everything seemed to be falling into place for the family. Bradley, who was now 7 years old, was thriving in the second grade, while his younger sister Jill was only 5 and attending kindergarten at Graceland Christian School. Kim seemed happy as she flourished in her position as a senior accountant at Louisville's insurance group. From an outside perspective, life seemed perfect. Yet, even within this seemingly peaceful household, whispers continued that David may have been unfaithful. Kim had even shared her worries about the spreading rumors with her closest friend. Still, despite all the speculation, nothing ever resulted from it until one unforgettable evening in September. On Thursday, September 28, 2000, David carried on with his usual routine, playing basketball with his friends at the local church recreation center. As always, Kim managed the children's activities and brought them back home. The evening seemed no different from any other, though the game continued longer than David had expected. Once it ended, he was eager to return home because he believed Kim could be upset with him. He grabbed his garage door opener and entered the driveway, aware that their home was just a short distance away. However, David froze when the garage door gradually lifted and revealed what was waiting inside. He discovered his wife, Kim, lying on the garage floor, apparently having been shot in the head. Beneath her was a pool of blood spread across the ground. The passenger door of her black Ford Bronco stood open, but David could not immediately determine whether his children were inside. He rushed toward the vehicle and looked through the Bronco. His worst fears became reality in the back seat. His children, Bradley and Jill, were in the same horrifying condition as Kim. David's training and instincts as a law enforcement officer immediately took over. Following a quick evaluation, he determined that Kim and Jill were beyond saving. Because his son showed no obvious signs of brain trauma, David Cam believed there was still a chance he was alive. Holding on to that hope, he climbed into the Bronco through the passenger side, squeezed past the two front bucket seats, and carefully removed his son. When he touched Bradley, he felt a faint warmth remaining in the boy's small body. After placing the child on the garage floor, he began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. During this process, Jill's head and upper body leaned forward and toward the left because David's left knee was pushing against the middle of the rear seat. With this movement, she came into contact with David's t-shirt, leaving blood marks on it. Regardless of whether David was responsible or innocent, this particular moment would become one of the most significant parts of the investigation. His DNA had now become connected to the crime scene because of what he had done. And when his attempts failed, the reality of the situation struck him with overwhelming force. David understood that he needed to act quickly. In a state of panic, he called his former employer, the Indiana State Police Department, asking for help. After the call, he rushed across the street to his uncle's home, shouting for someone to tell him what had happened. Then, filled with confusion and fear, he returned to the garage. When officers reached the scene, Kim was exactly as David had reported. Her body was lying on the floor, her pants were lowered, and blood was flowing from her head. Jill's body was found in the back seat of the vehicle, while Bradley's lifeless body was located close by. Investigators believed all three victims had likely been shot and killed at the same time. A bucket carrying the odor of bleach was sitting inside the garage. Since Kim left her car in a public parking area every day for work, investigators did not initially consider the unknown fingerprints found on the outside of the vehicle to be significant. No one appeared to recognize the sweater with the word backbone written beneath the collar, which was discovered underneath Bradley's body. When police asked David about it, he stated that it did not belong to him. As mentioned earlier, Kim was found dressed only in her blouse and underwear, without any pants, while her blood-covered jeans were located nearby. Like in most homicide investigations, David was the first person questioned because he was the victim's spouse. David remained highly cooperative, providing a thorough explanation of his day and saying that Kim and the children had probably arrived home around 7:30 or 7:40 p.m. Based on the state of the vehicle, David believed the murders must have occurred soon after they returned home. However, he could not name anyone who would have wanted to hurt his family. There was no apparent reason that would have caused Kim and the children to have enemies. Moreover, David continued to stand firmly by his alibi. He insisted that he was at a basketball game at the recreation center from 7 until 9:20 that night, exactly as he had claimed. David also continued maintaining that Kim would never have provoked such a violent act. Investigators first considered whether the incident could have been a robbery that went wrong, but that possibility was quickly rejected. The garage contained no signs of a forced break-in. Nobody had tried to gain access to the house, and nothing seemed to have been stolen. The evidence suggested something much more disturbing than a theft, a planned attack against Kim, Bradley, and Jill later, though the phone company revealed that David had made a call at 7:19 p.m. on the night of the murders, which became the strongest evidence against him. Since David had claimed he began playing basketball at 7 p.m., the fact that the call originated from his home landline created major doubts. The call he made after 7 p.m. and before 9 p.m. seriously challenged his version of events and directly conflicted with his account. The situation became even more complicated after the autopsy findings were released. Along with Jill's blunt force injury to her vaginal area, the examiner determined that all 3 victims had died because of gunshot wounds. Her death and these injuries seemed to have occurred within the same 24-hour time frame. Although an assault could not be dismissed, the examiner suggested that the injury may have resulted from a fall. Strangely, Jill had cried and complained about pain in that area during her dance class. It was a horrifying detail, but it remained uncertain whether it was connected to the damage found on her body. Before the murders, Kim had told a friend, "History is repeating itself." She offered no additional explanation, but her friend suggested that she take the children to Florida so they could discuss it further. Kim agreed that a trip might be helpful, but unfortunately, she was never able to take it. Was Kim referring to a previous experience of abuse, something involving David's alleged infidelity, or something far more dangerous? Because Kim was taken away from her family before she could reveal the truth, the answer may never be known. There was another unsettling discovery contained in the medical examiner's report. The tops of Kim's feet had been cut and covered with bruises. What seemed unusual was that her shoes were placed on top of the vehicle. It simply did not add up. The police had no straightforward explanation for any of these details. Although the investigation was still in its beginning stages, Kim's mother and several of David's close acquaintances began developing serious doubts about him. Her mother described Jill as a confident, energetic child who would have cried out if someone unfamiliar had been able to hear her. She felt that David was the only person capable of completely silencing Jill. The speculation continued on Sunday, 3 days later, especially since authorities had still not made any arrests. Despite the growing pressure, David went to church as he normally did with his parents and friends. The church had strong connections to the family, with his uncle serving as the pastor and conducting the service. David's grandfather had even helped build the church, and Kim had served as its treasurer. During the gathering, David cried, showing what appeared to be genuine sorrow. However, once he walked out of the church, the situation changed completely. Reporters surrounded him, and the media attention immediately caused him to appear suspicious. Observers noticed that David did not seem to be mourning in the way they expected. His cold and rigid behavior created even more uncertainty. Was David responsible for the brutal murders of his wife and children? If he was, what could have driven him to do it? The tension was high when David arrived at the station later that afternoon to speak with investigators. After that interview, police needed only 2 pieces of evidence: his clothing and a phone call, to arrest him. His claim that he was at the recreation center from 7 to 9:20 did not match the call that had been made at 7:19 that evening. That contradiction alone was enough to lead to his arrest. However, the consequences did not impact David alone. They spread throughout his entire family. The Kim family quickly became the most disliked people in Georgetown, a small community where everyone knew each other. Strangers began giving them hostile stares. Their answering machine was overwhelmed with hateful messages. As though that was not already enough, residents started calling them a group of wolves. Even David's grandfather suffered because of it. His church eventually shut down because so many people wanted no connection with the Kim family name. When the trial began in March 2002, prosecutors were prepared to confront the biggest question surrounding the case. Why would David commit such an act? They pointed toward his affairs as their explanation. They argued that David had become so dissatisfied with his marriage to Kim that he chose to murder his entire family instead of simply seeking a divorce. To strengthen this argument, prosecutors brought forward around a dozen women who either had relationships with David or claimed he had attempted to pursue them while he was married to Kim. Over several weeks of testimony, they depicted David as a habitual cheater who showed little respect for his marital promises. Then the evidence was presented. The prosecution's case relied heavily on 2 key elements: the blood evidence and the suspicious phone call. The defense, though, had no plans to give up. They argued that the blood found on David's shirt did not come from the shooting. Instead, they claimed it appeared when he was trying to rescue his son Bradley, and Jill's blood-covered hair came into contact with him. With the use of wigs and fake blood, they carried out a live courtroom demonstration to show how the same pattern could easily have been created. The defense blamed Indiana's notoriously inconsistent time zones for the phone call. They explained that the timestamp on the call failed to account for a 1-hour time zone difference. Once adjusted, the call actually matched David's timeline. It had been placed before he even headed to the basketball game. Then came the basketball, David's alibi. According to testimony from all 11 members of his team, he remained inside the church gym the entire time. He never walked out, not even briefly. With such a strong group of witnesses, it seemed the defense had uncovered serious flaws in the prosecution's argument. However, the jury viewed things differently. After being convicted of 3 murder charges and 1 conspiracy charge, David received a sentence of 195 years in prison. At first, it seemed like everyone could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Surely, justice had been served. But that was not the case. David had no intention of accepting his fate quietly. He appealed his conviction, arguing that the court should not have allowed evidence regarding his affairs to be presented. Surprisingly, the judge agreed in 2004 and overturned the conviction. The entire case was suddenly thrown into uncertainty once again. A major turning point came in early 2005, when the defense demanded another analysis of the DNA found on the sweatshirt recovered from the crime scene. David's second trial was scheduled for January 2006. They specifically asked for the National DNA Database, CODIS, to examine the 2 unknown DNA profiles. Following a court order, prosecutors were forced to cooperate despite previously refusing the request. It was discovered that one of the DNA samples had never actually been analyzed, even though prosecutors had claimed it had already been tested and that no matches were found. The results revealed that one of the samples did have a match. The DNA belonged to Charles Boney, a convicted felon from nearby New Albany. At the time of the crime, Boney was on parole after being convicted of multiple armed attacks against women, several of which involved taking their shoes. Among his latest offenses, he had attempted to abduct 3 women at gunpoint and carried out an armed robbery. Boney's background was deeply troubling. Before the attack, some of his victims claimed that he had repeatedly contacted them by phone for months, questioning whether they were wearing high heels and asking what clothing they had on. Given that Kim Camp's shoes had been removed and carefully placed on top of her vehicle within a chaotic crime scene, the defense argued that Boney's admitted foot fetish was also a significant detail. Additionally, Kim's foot showed scratches and bruises that seemed suspiciously linked to Boney's past behavior. Boney took a polygraph examination and participated in an interview, but the results indicated that he was being dishonest. He stated that he had donated the sweatshirt to a charity and rejected any involvement. Yet 2 weeks later, Boney was arrested when his palm print was found on Kim's vehicle. However, police accused him of arranging the murders together with David. Charles eventually explained his connection with David in a 5-page written confession. He stated that they first encountered each other during a pickup basketball game in New Albany, and that David appeared to be a genuinely kind person. He also claimed that David asked Charles to purchase an untraceable firearm for him for $100 at a meat store where they later met again. Charles accidentally left his palm print on David's Bronco while receiving and delivering the rifle to him. But as investigators continued questioning him, Charles's story began to shift. He later described David as a cruel person, accusing him of being unfaithful to his wife, Kim, and sexually assaulting his daughter, Jill. Charles claimed that David wanted the entire family murdered to conceal his secrets. After he lost control when Kim discovered what he had been doing to their daughter, Charles stated that he covered the gun with a gray sweatshirt before handing it over to David in an effort to prevent oil leaks. After following David to his home, he remained waiting in the driveway. Charles heard a heated argument, and then a gunshot followed. In a frightening moment, he claimed that he heard Bradley, Kim's son, shouting, "Daddy, Daddy!" immediately before another gunshot was fired. Charles said that shortly afterward, David walked outside and aimed the gun at him, possibly planning to kill him too. As if trying to clean up while escaping for his own safety, Charles moved Kim's shoes and hid inside the garage. Charles fled after hearing a woman arrive and pull into the driveway. Charles admitted that he was not the person who fired the weapon and that he had only sold David the rifle. As a black man, he said he was afraid to report the murders because he believed authorities would hold him responsible. Because of his statement, he was eventually arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and was taken back into custody to face trial. Charles had already spoken with Stan Faith, one of the prosecutors involved in David's original trial. This was discovered after his arrest. Charles claimed that he had a close relationship with Stan and had discussed the situation with him before he became a suspect. Stan later apologized for his involvement. Police uncovered another piece of evidence when they found DNA belonging to Charles's former girlfriend, Mala, on the gray sweater. They were together at the time, but their relationship ended shortly after the murders. Mala stated that after Charles told her he was going to work that night, he arrived back home at midnight with scraped-up knees. She became uneasy when he showed her a firearm she had never seen before. The following morning, Charles and his mother watched news coverage about the murders. Mala left after an argument and did not encounter Charles again for several weeks. She eventually ended their relationship, but the explanation for the blood found on the hoodie was that she had diabetes and regularly pricked her finger to monitor her blood sugar levels. Charles's story began to unravel. His girlfriend's statement conflicted with his claim that he departed the scene without taking the gun, suggesting that Charles might have returned to retrieve it. This created even more doubt surrounding David's responsibility. Even so, both men were charged in connection with the killings. Charles openly admitted selling the firearm to David and described his role in the murders in his autobiography, Blackbone, which he wrote while imprisoned. He also claimed that David promised him Kim's life insurance money in exchange for the weapon. In 2005, Charles was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, partly because of his writings, his confessions, and Mala's testimony. As a repeat offender, Charles was sentenced to 225 years in prison. But what about David? His second trial began on January 17, 2006, and the case was about to become even more complicated. Remember, the judge had ruled that prosecutors made an error by bringing up David's many affairs, which was the reason he was granted a retrial in the first place. His adultery, which had been one of the prosecution's main points at the start of this second trial, was thus formally off the table when the trial started. The prosecutors needed a fresh perspective without that piece of the puzzle, and they didn't hold back. They turned to a startling charge. David had been mistreating his daughter Jill for a long time, and he killed his whole family to hide his crimes. The accusations were extremely upsetting and instantly complicated the situation. David's defense team, however, refused to give up. They called in a reputable medical examiner who reported that Jill's autopsy revealed no signs of sexual assault, notably no hymenal injury. The defense team contended that there was insufficient evidence to support the allegation of sexual assault, and that the prosecution was fabricating the evidence to support their theory of the crime. Of course, this did not rule out the possibility of other types of abuse, since some techniques would not cause obvious harm. Although Jill did sustain blunt force injuries, some of which were in her pelvis, this expert also noted that these injuries weren't always a sign of sexual assault. The expert stated that there was no hard proof to back up the prosecution's allegations, and that these were only wounds from the vicious assault. The accusations against David represented only one part of this trial. Another major element was the new evidence that emerged after investigative efforts led authorities to locate Charles. Much of the additional information uncovered by police came directly from Charles. His own statements even revealed that David had purchased a firearm with the purpose of murdering his family. Despite this, the defense continued arguing that the prosecution had failed to provide enough evidence to prove David's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On March 20, 2006, after weeks of testimony, the jury convicted David of murdering his wife Kim and their children, Brad and Jill. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release. However, immediately after his conviction, David submitted an appeal, this time focusing on the accusations of abuse involving his daughter. He argued that those allegations had influenced the jury's decision and maintained that there was no evidence showing he had ever harmed Jill. And then, in a surprising ruling, the Indiana Supreme Court agreed with him, accepting David's argument that the prosecution's abuse allegations were not backed by sufficient evidence. They overturned the conviction. The court stated that the claims of sexual abuse were not supported by any credible evidence. But what was happening to Kim's family throughout all of this? They were forced to repeatedly endure the painful retelling of their daughter and grandchildren's horrific deaths inside the courtroom. Frank, Kim's father, was devastated by the decision. His anger was clear in his words as he said, "I was somewhat shocked by the reversal of the previous verdict. All we seek is the truth, and the truth is that David is guilty." Kim's family remained determined that David should spend the rest of his life behind bars. They only wanted justice because they had grown exhausted from the constant legal battles. Nearly 13 years later, in August 2013, David's third trial began. This proceeding was different from the previous ones. Prosecutors decided to pursue a new strategy, focusing on the life insurance policy David had obtained for Kim before her death. Charles claimed that David wanted the money and would not allow anyone to prevent him from getting it. It was worth noting that Kim had approved the changes, showing that she knew about and agreed to the increase in her life insurance coverage shortly before she died. During this trial, Charles took the witness stand again, and his testimony was just as shocking as before. He claimed that David had tricked him into coming to the house on the night of the killings. Charles also testified that David nearly shot him before he managed to escape. According to Charles, David committed all of the murders and that he never interacted with Brad, Jill, or Kim. However, David's defense team was ready. They had additional DNA evidence. This time, they presented proof that Charles's DNA was found on Kim's underwear, as well as Jill's and Kim's clothing. Additionally, the discovery of Charles's DNA beneath Kim's fingernails showed that Kim had fought back before she was killed. The blood pattern found on David's shirt was the strongest piece of evidence tying him to the crime scene, despite the extensive DNA findings and Charles's questionable involvement. While David's defense team argued that the blood could easily be explained by his attempt to help Brad after he had been shot in the head, causing him to come into contact with Brad's hair and leaving blood on his shirt, prosecutors insisted that the blood came from the victims. On October 24, 2013, after weeks of intense courtroom arguments and careful deliberation, the jury delivered their decision, not guilty on every charge. David was acquitted. When the announcement was made, he became overwhelmed with emotion, began crying, and thanked the jurors and his attorneys for believing in him. After years of exhausting legal battles, it was a moment that would go down in history. However, not everyone celebrated the outcome. The community remained divided. After all, many people had spent 13 years of media coverage questioning whether David had truly been innocent. Even with the large amount of evidence presented, some still felt that important questions remained unanswered. Despite the controversy surrounding him, David chose to stay in the town where everything had happened. He returned to work at his uncle's business and began rebuilding his life. As if his trials had not already been difficult enough, David later filed a civil lawsuit against other members of the prosecution team. You cannot destroy someone's life, strip away their freedom, damage their reputation, and erase their identity. That is not something you are supposed to do in this country, he said, openly revealing his anger. In the end, he received a settlement worth more than $5 million, 0 cents, with part of that money used to repay those who supported him throughout his 13-year battle. David is now trying to continue with his life. Even after rebuilding everything from the beginning, he still carries the pain of losing his family and his reputation. Since his acquittal, he has stayed connected with the jurors who played a role in his freedom. He also became a case coordinator for the Innocence Project. Because of what he personally experienced, David appears to be a perfect match for the organization, which works to overturn wrongful convictions. Meanwhile, Charles, the person at the center of the controversy, continues to maintain that he is innocent. He is now a committed Christian and says that he has found Jesus. In earlier interviews, he has given several versions of what happened that night, but his story has remained largely unchanged. He claims that he delivered an untraceable firearm to the Cam home on the night of the murder. He maintains that David was the person who fired the shot after he heard the confrontation and the sound of gunfire. With so many conflicting versions of events, it remains difficult to determine what truly motivated Charles to act the way he did. While many people still believe David had some involvement in the murders, the evidence was not enough to charge him. Some continue to question whether Charles was motivated by jealousy, greed, or something completely different. If you believe David was innocent, it is reassuring to see that he has regained his freedom and peace, rebuilding both his life and career. However, if you think he was guilty, it is impossible not to question how he managed to escape justice. What do you think? Did David commit the perfect crime, or was he genuinely innocent? And what caused Charles to take such an extreme path? Thank you all for watching. Your support means everything to me, and you can help this channel grow by pressing the like button, leaving a comment, and sharing this video. Your interaction truly helps make a difference. Dana Satterfield was born on November 16, 1967 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She was raised in a close religious family, and those who knew her described her as caring, gentle, and easy to adore. Dana possessed a talent for making friends wherever she traveled, and whenever somebody needed assistance, she was the sort of person who would appear without hesitating twice. She was also attracted to the beauty industry and everything related to it. After high school, Dana studied to become a hairstylist and began working in local salons. She appeared to adapt to the work effortlessly, and over time it became obvious to her that this was the profession she wanted to pursue. By then, she was residing in a small town called Roebuck, right beside her hometown. Almost immediately after graduating from high school, Dana married a man named Mike, and they eventually had 2 children together, a daughter and a son. For several years, Dana put aside money so she could open a small salon of her own, and eventually, she made that dream happen. But operating the business and keeping it going required almost all of her time and effort. By the summer of 1995, Dana was 27 years old and still employed at her hair salon, trying to juggle the responsibilities of her business with raising 2 children. On July 31st, at around 8:30 p.m., police got a call. A woman named Diane said she had been waiting near Dana's salon for a ride when she unexpectedly heard unusual noises coming from inside. The lights were off, but she could hear faint thumps from somewhere in the building. Then came a loud crash, and Diane watched a man leap out through the window. Diane knew Dana, so she immediately chose to report what she had witnessed. Just a few hours earlier, at around 6:30 p.m., she had entered Dana's salon and sold her some cleaning supplies. Then, about 20 minutes before calling police, Diana had gone past the salon again, and at that moment, the lights were still on. She had even spotted Dana through the window, tidying up inside, and Dana had waved to her. So when Diane later noticed the lights off and the man climbing from the window, she believed Dana must have already headed home, and that someone had entered the salon. Since she didn't have a cell phone, she rushed into a nearby store to call 911. To her surprise, almost right behind her came the very man she had just seen jumping out of the salon window. He looked at her, then walked away, and Diane called the police. An officer who happened to be nearby reached the salon expecting to investigate what appeared to be a minor break-in. But what he discovered was far beyond anything he could have imagined. When he entered the salon, he started searching it with a flashlight, and at first nothing seemed immediately out of place. But then he walked into the back room and discovered Dana. Part of her clothing was gone and her body was covered in scratches. But that was not the most horrifying detail. There was a belt around her neck, and the other end had been fastened to a water heater, leaving her body slightly lifted off the floor. The officer immediately requested backup, and police began examining the scene. Because the town was so small, they identified Dana right away. And since some of her clothing was missing, investigators believed the attacker might have sexually assaulted her. At the same time, detectives quickly eliminated robbery as a motive. Cash and other valuables remained inside the salon, and the scene itself was far too violent to resemble a random break-in. To investigators, it pointed more towards something deeply personal. While crime scene technicians examined the salon for fingerprints or biological evidence, officers recorded Diane's statement. They had little doubt that the man who had jumped out of the window was the killer, and because Diane had crossed paths with him again inside the store, she had managed to get a brief look at his face. Based on her description, police were able to create a composite sketch. He was a young white man about 5'9" in tall, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. But even in a town that small, she did not identify him. Diane sold cleaning products and was constantly traveling around the area offering them to people, so she knew many of the locals. But this man was somebody she had never encountered before. Police immediately circulated the sketch throughout the area and began searching nearby streets for the killer. But none of it led anywhere. They also looked through Diane's appointment book and saw that her last scheduled client that evening had arrived several hours before she was killed. Based on Diane's statement about 20 minutes before the attack, Dana had been tidying the salon, apparently preparing to close. So, investigators believed the killer must have entered the salon and attacked her almost immediately, then dragged her into the back room and secured her to the water heater. As crime scene technicians examined the room, they found one lone fingerprint on that water heater. Since the killer had tied the belt to it, he almost certainly had to touch its surface. So, investigators believed the print belonged to the person who killed Dana. Police started looking into the people closest to Dana and discovered that not long before the murder, she and her husband had begun living separately, though they had not filed for divorce. Officers asked him for his fingerprints, and forensic experts quickly determined that the print found on the water heater belonged to him. But the idea that he might have been involved in the murder began to fall apart almost right away. When detectives interviewed Mike, he said that he had been watching the children that evening. His daughter and son, who were 8 and 6 years old, confirmed that their father had not left the house. On top of that, Mike did not match the witness's description of the man she had seen. He was a large guy, and police had a hard time believing he could have climbed out through the salon window. After speaking with Dana's loved ones, investigators discovered that she and Mike really had been having problems in their marriage and were living apart. But everyone told them the same thing. The two were still on good terms and were even trying to preserve the marriage for the sake of their children. Finally, Mike agreed to take a polygraph test, and the examiner found no signs of deception. Mike explained that he had personally installed the water heater where his print had been found, and that he occasionally serviced it along with other things around the salon. So before long, detectives ruled Mike out as a suspect and went back to trying to determine who had really killed Dana. But before long, forensics reported that they had found another print in the salon. This one left in blood. DNA testing showed that the blood belonged to Dana, which meant the fingerprint itself almost certainly had to belong to the killer. But it was not in any database, and when investigators compared it to the people in Dana's life, they found no match. A few days later, investigators received the autopsy report, and it confirmed just how brutal the attack had been. Dana had been strangled, and her body was covered in bruises and scrapes, apparently from being struck repeatedly. Experts also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and recovered biological evidence from the attacker. But at the time, the FBI's DNA database was not yet up and operating. So detectives could not simply submit the sample and wait for a hit. The only thing they could do was gather samples from possible suspects and compare them to the killer's DNA one by one. Police began gathering DNA from different men, but none of it led anywhere. That went on for several days until a new witness came forward. A man named Ken said that on the night of the murder, he had driven past Dana's salon and noticed something unusual. First, he saw that the lights inside the salon were off, but Dana's car was still parked outside. The second thing Ken noticed was an unfamiliar man standing near a white and blue Ford Bronco parked beside a neighboring business. The problem was Ken worked at that very place and he knew it was already closed. So seeing an unfamiliar man in the parking lot struck him as odd. The man also looked uneasy and he stared at him in a tense, hostile way until Ken drove past. According to Ken, this happened at around 8:40 p.m., which meant it was already after the murder. So now, police had a possible clue about the kind of vehicle the killer may have been driving. Of course, they could not be sure the man Ken had seen was actually connected to the crime. But at that point, it was basically the only lead they had. They began investigating the owners of similar vehicles, and a few suspicious names did come up. But while police could not completely eliminate those people, they also had no way to prove any of them were guilty. Months passed by like that, and with every passing day, detectives began to doubt more and more that they would ever catch the person responsible. For the people in town, the situation was painful too. They knew a brutal killer could be living among them, and police still could not find him. People tried to help however they could. Every so often, someone would call 911 after spotting a Ford Bronco that looked like the same one police were searching for. Even Dana's children knew what kind of vehicle investigators were looking for. So, whenever they spotted one, they would tell their father. But none of it led anywhere until the case suddenly got an unforeseen break. Several months after the murder, when the investigation had already gone almost completely cold, police received a call from the jail. An inmate told them that his cellmate, Russell Quinn, might have been connected to Dana's murder. According to the cellmate, Russell often talked about knowing Dana and kept saying how beautiful she had been. The inmate also claimed Russell had a photograph of her, and that at one point, he had even admitted he was the one who had killed her. Police began investigating Russell and learned that he had been free at the time Dana was murdered. He was now in jail for sexual assault, and detectives immediately noticed one very specific detail. In that case, Russell had tied his victim to a tree, and as we remember, Dana had been tied to a water heater. Investigators also learned that Russell drove a similar vehicle, and he looked very much like the composite sketch of the killer. Finally, they took his photograph, added 5 photos of other men, and showed the lineup to Diane, the witness who had seen the killer. After looking at the picture, she pointed to Russell and said he was the man she had observed. Detectives immediately sent Russell's DNA to the lab to compare it with the sample recovered from Dana's killer. But the results were not what they expected. Russell was not a match. Police had been almost certain he was involved, but just like that, one of their strongest leads was gone. After that, there was almost no progress in the case. Over time, it went cold completely. With each passing year, Dana's loved ones lost more and more hope that her killer would ever be caught, and even her children no longer believed justice would come. That went on for 10 years. By then, Dana's daughter, Ashley, was 18 and had started college. One day, she stopped at an auto shop for a routine oil change, and that ordinary stop would end up bringing her mother's case back to life. While Ashley stood outside waiting for her car, one of the mechanics told his coworkers that she looked a lot like Dana, the woman who had been killed 10 years earlier. They told him that Ashley was Dana's daughter, and the mechanic was stunned. He had not even known Dana had children. After that, he could not stop dwelling on it. He felt guilty, not because he had anything to do with Dana's murder, but because he might have known the name of the person who did. 10 years earlier, when the mechanic was 17, he had called police anonymously and told them that Dana's murder may have been committed by another 17-year-old named Jonathan Vick. At the time, police had investigated Jonathan and learned that his mother owned a white and blue Ford Bronco, and that on the night of the murder, Jonathan had been driving it. But his mother firmly refused to let police speak with her son or examine the vehicle. She insisted he had nothing to do with what happened and demanded they leave her family alone. Police tried to get a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA and fingerprints, but the judge refused to sign it based only on an anonymous phone call. So, investigators had no choice but to back away. Now, 10 years later, that same mechanic was calling again. He repeated everything he had told police back then and once again asked to remain anonymous. But officers explained that, unless he was willing to give his name and make an official statement, there was only so much they could do. Michael understood that if he wanted to help bring justice for Dana, he could not stay anonymous anymore. So this time, he put his name behind the story. He was 27 years old now, and he told police everything he knew. According to Michael, on the night of the murder, his friend Jonathan had given him a ride home in his mother's white and blue Ford Bronco. During the drive, Jonathan suddenly said he was planning to get his hair cut that night. Michael thought that was strange since it was already late, but Jonathan told him he was going there for Dana, not for the haircut. He had visited that salon many times before, just like his mother, so both of them knew Dana. Then Jonathan started talking about how beautiful she was and how he wanted to have sex with her. Michael thought he was joking since Jonathan was 10 years younger than Dana, so he just smiled. But Jonathan took it badly and snapped back with something like, "You don't think I can do it?" At the time, Michael still believed his friend was kidding, so he let the conversation drop. The next day, when the news reported Dana's murder, Michael refused to believe his friend could have had anything to do with it. But once police announced they were looking for a white Ford Bronco, he began to realize Jonathan really might have been involved. Things got even worse after the two of them met again, and Jonathan told him he would kill him if he ever told anyone about that night. That was why Michael decided to call police anonymously. He was afraid for his life, but at the same time, he could not keep carrying that information. 10 years later, it was Dana's children who finally pushed him to come forward. After thinking about what it must have been like for them to grow up without their mother, Michael pushed through his fear and decided to give up his anonymity. Now that police had a witness, the judge signed a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA. By then, Jonathan was living in Greenville, about a half-an-hour drive from the place where Dana had been killed. In the years since the murder, he had served 2 years in the Marine Corps, and he now had a wife and daughter. But he had never managed to keep steady work because he kept getting fired over his attitude. He clashed with coworkers, started arguments, and refused to obey his supervisors. At the same time, Jonathan did not have a serious criminal record. He had been arrested twice, once for vandalism and once for domestic violence. But in both cases, the charges were dropped. Police collected his DNA, and before long, forensic experts confirmed it. The semen recovered from Dana's body belonged to Jonathan. He denied being involved with the murder and insisted he had not even known the victim at all. But the evidence spoke for itself. When Jonathan was arrested and officers simply escorted him to the car in front of reporters' cameras, he said, "I love my wife and my daughter. That's all that matters." Throughout the interrogation that followed, he continued to deny any involvement in Dana's murder. So investigators proceeded forward and prepared the case for trial. Based on everything they had discovered, detectives believed they could finally reconstruct what happened that night. Jonathan had traveled to Dana's salon just as he had told Michael he would. Most likely he used the haircut as a reason to get inside. Then at some point he made some sort of sexual advance. Dana may have believed he was joking at first, or she may have simply rejected him. That was when he secured the front door from the inside, switched off the lights, and attacked her. It appears Dana lost consciousness, and Jonathan then pulled her into the back room where he sexually assaulted her and strangled her with the belt. The one detail detectives still did not fully understand was why Jonathan decided to climb out through the window instead of just opening the front door and walking out. That decision was precisely what caught Diane's attention and caused her to call police. It was possible that if Jonathan had simply unlocked the door, he would have noticed someone nearby and remained inside until the area was empty. But instead, he exited the salon that way, entered his car, which was parked nearby, and drove away. When police later received the anonymous tip from his friend and attempted to collect Jonathan's DNA and fingerprints, his mother interfered, and detectives were left with nothing they could do. Now though, with Michael's official statement and the DNA results, there was no real doubt that Jonathan would be convicted. But investigators were still in for one more unexpected twist. As they prepared for trial, they continued digging into Jonathan's past. And before long, they discovered something alarming. In 2002, 3 years before his arrest, he had been in a relationship with a woman named Heather Sears, and the two of them had even gotten engaged. But that fall, the engagement was ended, and just 2 weeks later, Heather vanished without a trace. Back then, police learned that Heather had continued seeing Jonathan right up until her disappearance. The last time she was seen, the two of them had gone to a bar together, and after that, no one ever saw her again. Later, her car was discovered at the bottom of a river, but Heather was not inside. Her loved ones said her relationship with Jonathan had been extremely troubled, and that she had reported abuse more than once. Because of all that, Jonathan had been the primary suspect in her disappearance, but police were never able to prove he was involved. While prosecutors were getting ready for Dana's trial, police learned something else. Jonathan had been in jail the entire time, and one day his cellmate contacted detectives. According to that inmate, Jonathan had said that if he could return to one day in his life, it would be the day he went to Dana's salon. On top of that, he admitted that he had parked his car beside another business because he didn't want anyone to see it near the salon. And he said he had climbed out through the window because he was extremely scared. The trial started in November 2006, around a year after Jonathan's arrest. He still claimed he was innocent, but with all of that evidence before them, it did not take long for the jury to reach a unanimous final decision. Jonathan was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. When the sentence was officially announced, he broke down crying and said the actual real killer was still out there and that justice had not been served. However, Jonathan still has the possibility of parole, and he will be eligible to request it in 2035. But it is unlikely he will be freed that early. While in prison, he assaulted a correctional officer and received an additional extra 3 years for it. And that incident will almost certainly affect any possible future parole decision. It is also worth noting that after Jonathan was arrested in Dana's case, investigators discovered and located an abandoned car registered in his name. Inside, they found hair and what seemed to be bloodstains, but there was not enough material to conduct DNA testing. Still, investigators believe that discovery may be directly linked to Heather's disappearance. And if that is true, then Dana may not have been his only victim.